Bonjour. Hello, everybody. My name is Craig Settee. I work at the Can-SOLVE CKD network as a cultural competency manager there. And just starting off our session today, I'd like to acknowledge that today we're gathered here on the territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations that have called this territory home for millennia. And with that, I also wanted to share this short video that we've developed with some of our patient partners at the network, dedicated to the work of land acknowledgements and just some of that work. So I'll get them to play the video here, and you'll hear from one of our patient partners named Mary Bocage.
Acknowledging the land is a First Nations tradition that goes back generations. It's a means of rooting yourself in the place that you gather. Traditional greetings will vary by region, but generally mention who I am, where do my people or family come from, what is my purpose, where am I going, and thanking the land and nature that is hosting you. Here is my example. Mary Bocage Nishtakaz, Bising Dunjaba, Robinson Huron Treaty Nunjaba. My name is Mary Bocage. I'm from Nipissing First Nation and Robinson Huron Treaty Territory in northeastern Ontario, and this is my homeland. Land acknowledgements are not exclusive to one group or side. We are all treaty people. If you live on this land, you are part of a treaty relationship. It's imperative that you prepare a land acknowledgement. The acknowledgement is one step to relearn the diverse nations that existed and continue to exist across Canada. The British Crown and First Nations negotiated and signed many treaties before Confederation. The intent of these treaties was to deliver mutual benefits. First Nations signed as independent, self-governing nations. Although many treaties were signed more than a century ago, treaty commitments are just as valid today as they were then. They are meant to be upheld and stewarded by us and our generations before and after. Language is important. We are not Indians, Aboriginal, or Native. Think of it this way. Indigenous is an umbrella term, and under it, the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. All are unique. All have differing relationships and history with the Government of Canada and the provinces. It is up to you to learn about this. The land acknowledgement that you create has to come from a good place. It can be as long or as short as you feel is right for you. It can include history or facts that you've learned. It shouldn't be solemn. It should be uplifting and positive. Your acknowledgement is a living statement and should be written in present tense. Land acknowledgements can seem intimidating at first. It might take you out of your comfort zone. If you're in a situation where each person is stating their city and territory and you reside in the same area as them, it's important for each of us to say it, even if it seems repetitive. The city and territory each bear equal weight. The more you say it, the easier it becomes and you will feel more comfortable. Once you feel that comfort, take the next step. Move on from reading a pre-scripted land acknowledgement and include your own reflections. You will become a leader in this practice. As an Anishinaabe woman, I appreciate you doing the work and hearing you share your acknowledgement. It is very important and meaningful to me. Do I want to speak up and help you pronounce words that are foreign to you? Yes. But as a mother watches her baby walk, I have to let you learn. Regarding pronunciation, I sometimes think of using big, long technical terms. If you can learn to say complex terms, the name of a territory you live on can be learned as well. Don't shy away from using proper names in your acknowledgement. They add significance and decrease the erasure of Indigenous nations and their territories and homelands. Indigenous languages are beautiful and descriptive. The words can also be tricky. Phonetic pronunciations are available, and so are people who can help you with words and names. Take some time and visit an Indigenous Friendship Center or contact a nearby community. Reach out to colleagues. Ceremonies and gatherings can be opportunities to connect with people in the land. There's a tangible relationship that can take place and provide meaningful connections. Go with a humble heart, and don't be afraid to ask. People will always guide you. My challenge to you is to find out what treaty territory you live on. Why is that treaty or unceded territory significant? Take those teachings and use them to help you foster your relationship to the land and the Indigenous peoples in your area. This is one small step towards reconciliation. A young knowledge keeper said that we will be ancestors one day, and our actions and inactions will affect the ones to come. It's always stuck with me because we think of the 7 generations before us and the 7 generations after with every action we take or decision we make. Miigwech.
So that's a video that we created about land acknowledgements, and just thankful to be gathered here today on Kemkemkale. It's one of the words that I've learned how to say, especially driving in from Squamish. You see them on the signs when you're driving in, and so yeah, just wanted to start us off in that way, and I'll pass it over to Jocelyn.
Oops, wrong page. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the welcome, Craig, and starting us off in a good way. I'm just going to lower that because it's a little tall. My name is Jocelyn Jones, and I'm the Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council Coordinator with Can-SOLVE CKD. Just to give some context and some more acronyms to learn, Can-SOLVE stands for Canadians Seeking Solutions and Innovations to Overcome Chronic Kidney Disease, which was one of the 5 chronic kidney disease research networks funded under the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research. And today, along with my colleagues, Catherine and Craig, we are grateful to have the opportunity to share with you our experience in building knowledge and cultivating kinship with Indigenous Knowledge Keepers to engage in research and to embody Indigenous measures of success within our work at Can-SOLVE. Thank you. I'll pass it back to Craig.
Back to me. I just wanted to share quickly our learning objectives for the session today, so you can all see up there, to share the engagement and development of an Indigenous Patient Partner Council. Secondly, to understand practices and protocols of engaging with Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers. And lastly, to inform of 6 R's of culturally relevant engagement and review a case study of that process. And we just had a statement at the bottom about our presentation that even though it was developed in the context of kidney health, this information can be applicable to any research being done. With that, I'll pass it on to Catherine.
Thanks, Craig. And hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. So my name is Catherine Turner. I am Red River Métis, having lived now half of my life, the latter half of my life, and beyond, I hope, on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox and Petlatch peoples on beautiful Vancouver Island. I hold a bachelor's degree in professional communication, a graduate certificate in Indigenous public health. I am a certified Indigenous coach, a certified trauma-informed coach, and I am in the process of completing my International Coach Federation certification. I have worked as the Indigenous Liaison Manager with the Can-SOLVE CKD network since 2016. In addition, I hold the position of Senior Research Coordinator for the BC Kidney Check Project in partnership with the First Nations Health Authority. Within this role, I engage with over 16 First Nations communities. As the Indigenous Liaison Manager for the Can-SOLVE CKD network, I am responsible for brokering and maintaining meaningful and authentic partnerships with Indigenous organizations, communities, elders, knowledge keepers, and the Can-SOLVE CKD network. My work guides network members and project teams in ensuring culturally safe and respectful engagements and implementation and evaluation of programs. I am committed to amplifying Indigenous voices and to advancing the inclusion of Indigenous ways of knowing and being throughout all the projects I'm involved with. I will introduce Craig, or share a bit about Craig, who is Nehina, Swampy Cree, and Anishinaabe man who was born and raised in Winnipeg, Manitoba. He is a citizen of Fisher River Cree Nation with family ties to Dauphin River First Nation. Craig is a living kidney donor to his brother and recently celebrated the 11-year transplant anniversary in October 2023. Craig has over 2 decades of experience as an Oshka-Baywis, helper to traditional knowledge holders and elders, which has formed his passion to serve community and advocate for Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing in his circles of influence. He has several years of experience working as a cultural support worker, action therapist, and community organizer with First Nations and inner-city community-based organizations. He is passionate about increasing Indigenous representation and amplifying community voices to center experiences and priorities of Indigenous communities to build more collaborative working and research relationships. Craig currently works as the Cultural Competency Manager at the network, which involves implementing, evaluating, and managing the Wabishki Bizhiko Skaanj learning pathway. He currently resides as an uninvited guest on Coast Salish territory in Kemkemkale. And my pleasure also to share more about Jocelyn Jones, who is Can-SOLVE CKD's Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Coordinator. IPERC is the acronym. She is a First Nations and proud member of Shoal Lake 40 in Kenora, Ontario on her mother's side, and Ukrainian European on her father's side. She was born and raised on the beautiful unceded territory of the Silks Nation in Vernon, BC, and currently lives in Kelowna. She holds a degree in Indigenous Studies from the University of British Columbia. Jocelyn brings personal experience in health advocacy and has a passion for Indigenous health and wellness to support Indigenous voices through the Can-SOLVE CKD Research Network. So Can-SOLVE CKD, the Can-SOLVE CKD network is a national network that brings together kidney patients, researchers, healthcare providers, policymakers, kidney donors, and caregivers. So when we look at Indigenous healthcare priorities, we are faced with the fact, a statistic, that 1 in 10 Canadians are diagnosed with chronic kidney disease. 1 in 3 First Nations adults are diagnosed with chronic kidney disease. As we are aware through the sharing of personal experiences and stories, that racism in healthcare is endemic. And we also know this through numerous studies and reports. We believe that health outcomes for Indigenous peoples will improve by making way for self-determination and through the work that we carry out. Can-SOLVE CKD governance. IPERC is one of 2 governing bodies within Can-SOLVE CKD. Members of the council are part of numerous committees throughout the network. The executive committee recently welcomed 2 new Indigenous representatives. In the council, Okay. In the council, there are 20+ members, and they include Indigenous patients, caregivers, researchers, health practitioners, community health leaders, and knowledge keepers. Now I'll pass it over to Jocelyn. Thanks.
Thanks, Catherine. So moving more into about the Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council, known as IPERC. It began its formation in 2015 and exists to guide the conduct of Can-SOLVE's activities and sharing the unique experiences and aspects of patient-oriented research that involve First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. This includes responding to the needs and concerns that are significant to the health and wellness priorities of Indigenous people and respecting that Indigenous cultural traditions exist outside of mainstream health research. We're also guided by various health needs in which affect Indigenous community, and the purpose of the council is to facilitate that meaningful engagement in kidney research across Canada. As Catherine was mentioning, we currently have 15 members, of which are the Indigenous patient partners, caregivers, researchers, health practitioners, community leaders, and knowledge keepers. And at the heart of what we do is that relationship building, especially with funders, community-based organizations, and patient partners across Canada. We exist to create a safe space of sharing of personal stories, which allows others to join that journey that we're also on. The sharing of stories is what gives us a voice to address the success and inequities that we have all experienced. IPERC is mandated to ensure that the Indigenous patient partner voices are supported, which includes that connection to research and kidney education being done, specifically projects involved in the network activities. This also takes into the account of including patient partner voices in the development of these resources, which supports patients and researchers to maintain that culturally respectful engagement. For example, a resource developed by the network with the involvement of IPERC is the Wabishki Bizhiko Skaanj learning pathway, which Craig will share more about soon. IPERC members are also involved in various network activities, which include sitting on our research operations team. Our co-chairs of IPERC currently sit on the steering committee and are there to ensure knowledge translation and mobilization has that representation of Indigenous voices. Within our leadership team, we have 2 members on that committee from IPERC, and at Can-SOLVE, we continue to strive for that patient voice, especially Indigenous patient partner voices in our work. We also have non-voting members from collaborating organizations that work to support Indigenous peoples and communities. Next, I was going to share a little bit about 2 of our members of IPERC and the network and their involvement within and the work outside of it. Dr. Evelyn Voyager is an elder of the Kwaiyuwak Nation and an elder advisor to the Can-SOLVE CKD network. Dr. Voyager is a registered nurse with a PhD in psychology. She has worked extensively in community and hospital-based healthcare in Alberta and British Columbia. She has worked with the Indian Residential School Society, where her work focus was on supporting former students healing from trauma or residential schools. Dr. Voyager is an educator who has taught and developed nursing curricula at the University of Victoria and North Island College. Dr. Voyager has dedicated her life to transforming Indigenous healthcare across Canada. She also works to raise awareness about the systemic institutionalized racism faced by Indigenous people long before these were in the public eye. She had the courage to speak out when there was not many people in the nursing profession taking action to reduce stigma and oppression faced by Indigenous people. She currently remains on as a knowledge keeper to the Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council and within our Wabishki Bizhiko Skaanj learning pathway. Next, I'll share about Dr. Malcolm King. He is a member of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. Dr. King is a health researcher at the University of Saskatchewan and joined the Department of Community Health and Epidemiology in October of 2017. He was the scientific director of the Saskatchewan Centre for Patient-Oriented Research. He continues to teach and research Indigenous health with a focus on wellness and engagement. He remains on as a Knowledge Keeper advisor to the Indigenous Peoples Engagement and Research Council, the Learning Pathway, and Can-SOLVE's leadership team. We're really grateful to have these amazing members and all of our members on council as well. Next, I wanted to explain the importance of ceremony when cultivating kinship and respectful engagement with Indigenous people. The Can-SOLVE CKD network has embedded ceremonial events to facilitate and create a safe space for Indigenous people. Through phase 1 and now into phase 2, we welcomed and support ceremony. We hosted a naming ceremony for our Wabishki Bizhiko Skaanj learning pathway, the sharing of traditional dance and songs, blanket ceremonies by engaging on unemotional and intellectual levels, smudging for connection and spirit, tobacco offering as a sign for assistance in a respectful way, sweat lodges and cedar brushings facilitated by elders and knowledge keepers in the local area. These Indigenous ceremonies enhance knowledge translation and Indigenous health and wellness. Importantly, these ceremonies are also training opportunities for all of our network members to engage in Indigenous ways of doing, knowing, and being. Relationship building is ceremony from an Indigenous perspective, and I'd like to end off with a quote from Sean Wilson, and he quotes, "Indigenous research is the ceremony of maintaining accountability to relationships. Relationships don't just shape Indigenous reality, they are our reality." Miigwech, thank you. I'll pass it back to Craig now.
Thanks again, Jocelyn. How's everyone doing? Yeah, oh, okay, I just want to make sure everyone's awake. Hey, just kidding. I think that's also an important part of ceremony is humor. I think we need to make sure that we remember to have fun while we're at conferences and making our presentations. And it's definitely a big part of Indigenous life as well, is finding humor in all kinds of situations. And so what I'll speak to next is this image here. So we're talking about cultivating kinships with Indigenous knowledge keepers and elders. And a part of that work was a Knowledge Keepers in Research series, but you'll see a little bit of people gathered on the right there. But at first I'll talk about the Wabishki Bizhiko Skaanj learning pathway. And so that image in the center is an image that was developed by a graphic designer who we had worked with named Jocelyn King. And she really helped to bring the vision of the name to life in this image in the center of the horse with the little person kind of standing on there and all of the kind of hairs and colors from that horse that are going off there. And so I'll just tell you, the little person on that horse is Elder Dan Thomas, who found the name, who gifted the name Wabishki Bizhiko Skaanj. At the request of the past co-chair of the Learning Pathway group. And so Dan Thomas was asked to do a pipe ceremony with our working group and find the name. And so the name that came to him during that ceremony was Wabishki Bizhiko Skaanj, which loosely translates to white horse. But within the image, you'll see one paw, kind of one of the hoofs there hanging down from the center of the circle. And what that hoof is doing is, Elder Dan mentioned to us that that hoof is, in the vision, it was digging at a root, and that root is racism. And so the meaning for cultural competency and cultural safety training is to dig at that root of racism and expose it. So with that, with the rest of the image we have on here, as I mentioned, the Knowledge Keeper gathering that we held last fall around this time, Sam Brad came to this gathering and drew a number of beautiful images during our time together. And part of what he depicted here is in the top right, We also hosted a blanketing ceremony with the Knowledge Keepers, and part of that was to honor them for all of the teachings they shared with, all of the time that they spent with us. And one of the reasons we did that is because it's very important to honor the Knowledge Keepers we work with while they're still alive and while they're still with us, because we know that we have limited time with them, and it's important to take that time to give thanks to all that they give to us, because they do gift us with a lot of knowledge and a lot of time that they could be spending with their community and their families. And I just wanted to highlight one more thing on the bottom here, is that word resurgence. So for those of you online, I'm circling around resurgence on the bottom right, and one of the Knowledge Keepers at the gathering, Latash Nahani, mentioned that word a number of times, and the importance of that is the resurgence of Indigenous ways of knowing, Indigenous ways of doing, Indigenous ways of being, and so that is what some of this work embarks to do. And a part of the learning pathway as well is using Indigenous methods, and I'm sure many people are familiar with medicine wheels. I also like to call it circle work. Sometimes it's not always a medicine wheel, but we gather in circles. We use circles to depict a lot of the work that we do. And so in this circle, we have 4 L's that we call. And so Can-SOLVE's initial tagline was listening, learning, and leading. And with the naming of the learning pathway, Elder Dan mentioned to us that we were missing something, and it was looking, and that's the observation part, I think, of research as well, is looking. So, looking within to observe and examine racial identities, privileges, and biases. The bottom of the circle is listening to Indigenous voices, stories, experiences, and expertise. The left side of the circle there in red is learning more about the history of colonization in Canada and its impacts on Indigenous peoples and their health. And last but certainly not least is on the top in white is leading. So to reflect on learning, commit to taking appropriate actions, as well as building genuine partnerships with people. And all of that work takes time and takes a lot of relationship building. And so next here, I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual learning pathway. So these are the training markers that are part of the pathway. I've highlighted, the Knowledge Keepers here in red. And so that's the part that that I'm focused on a little bit today, sharing with you. But just to tell you briefly about the Land Acknowledgement series. So you obviously saw the video to start us off today. The second marker there is a Kairos blanket exercise. I'm sure many people have heard of that interactive training as well. It's usually done in person, but it's also now offered virtually. BC, I'm sure is no stranger to Sanyas Indigenous Cultural Safety Training, online training that is very impactful. Next to that is the Indigenous Research and Ethics Protocols webinars. So Jocelyn also mentioned Dr. Malcolm King, and he has a 3-part series in there where he dives into that topic. We have the Knowledge Keepers and Research learning marker that I'll talk more about in the following slides. Below that is OCAP training. So if people are familiar with First Nations Information Governance Center, they administer the OCAP training, which is data sovereignty and data usage of First Nations data. So it stands for ownership, control, access, and possession, as well as we highlight the Tri-Council Policy Statement training in there as well, specifically Chapter 9, relating to involvement of Indigenous peoples in research. And the last marker on here is a cultural competency knowledge bundle. It has various multimedia information to kind of continue your cultural competency journey. And so that's the pathway. And next I'll talk a little bit more about some Knowledge Keepers in research. As you'll notice, I like pictures. Not a lot of text and bullet points on there. I think that's also an important part of an Indigenous way, is to try and tell stories, highlight stories, share our stories, and sometimes pictures are the best way to capture that. And so again, Sam Brad captured this information during our time with the Knowledge Keepers. And what I wanted to draw attention to was this was kind of a part of our day one together. And so you'll see on the left side here some cedar branches. And that was to start the day with cedar brushing, the importance of ceremony and starting off in that good way. And again, Latash Nahani, who I had mentioned before, and his wife, Delia, were the ones who led us in that practice of welcoming us to their territory here as Squamish Knowledge Keepers and Elders. And I think what really draws me next to that is, where is it? There's a saying on here that says, culture saves lives. And so I think that's also a really important part of what knowledge keepers bring to not only the community, but if you're lucky enough to involve them in your research, they bring a lot of that cultural knowledge, that historical knowledge of their communities and their people to the table, as well as their personal experiences as well with healthcare. And you know, they've been around for a long time, so they have a lot of knowledge to draw from. An important part of that is also in this image, there's a piece that says transforming care, and that's also a part of involving knowledge keepers, is their advice, their experiences, their connection to community can also help to transform that care. By way of you know, traditional medicines, there's obviously knowledge keepers that have all different kinds of specialties, but you know, traditional medicine that they bring, ceremonies that they also can conduct, and there's also a lot of academic knowledge keepers as well that have a lot of, you know, scientific backgrounds as well, and can you know, hold their own in those conversations and in those research circles as well. And I think the really important part of this image as well is around knowledge keepers who support holistic well-being. You know, it's important to utilize Western medicine, but it's also important to utilize traditional medicine. And so I think that's an important part that knowledge keepers bring to the tables when they come there. And the ultimate goal of all of this in the bottom right here is to help close gaps in kidney health outcomes. And next I'll talk a little bit about the research guidebook that was developed with knowledge keepers. So I have two covers here. The pink cover is the cover of the book, and the blue cover is within the whole booklet. But just to give you a bit of background, the knowledge keepers and research work was developed over the past 6 years. We conducted interviews with 11 knowledge keepers from I think 6 or 7 provinces. And so the important part of that work was there were 7 themes that were identified throughout those interviews with them. And with the help of IPERC as well, we also hosted a workshop where we went over the interviews and coded some of those themes that came out. And that's kind of how the guidebook was developed. It was also launched in 2021. And encourage you to utilize the link at the bottom. We'll share our slides as well at the end of the presentation to learn more about the book. And the blue cover is also a guide on protocols and guidelines. And so something that I'll just highlight from there is also about guidelines on acknowledging host nations, requesting information on requesting Indigenous knowledge keepers as speakers, to your events. I know Elder Roberta Price also opened up this morning, so you know, just around building those relationships and making those asks, as well as extending invitations if knowledge keepers maybe won't be speaking at an event. You know, inviting them to participate as witnesses is an important thing to do as well. And I know there was a bit of conversation today on the main stage with Dr. Amy Lang about compensation guidelines as well. And so I think that's another really important piece to consider when you're working with knowledge keepers is honoraria, providing them with honorariums to do the work that you're asking them to do. And one thing I wanted to mention about that, that one of the knowledge keepers mentions in our videos as well is that you should be paying knowledge keepers the same levels as you do PhDs, executive level people, because they come with a wealth of knowledge. And as you've seen, also some of the knowledge keepers that we do work with do have their doctorates. They are PhDs, you know, so that's one important consideration when working with knowledge keepers is about that. And with that, I will go on to our next slide and ask to play this short video where you'll hear from the actual knowledge keepers, and this series is important in hearing their voices, not just reading their words on a page.
Ani, I'm Malcolm King. I'm a member of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I'm privileged to be a member of the Knowledge Keepers in Research Circle at Can-SOLVE CKD. I'm here to introduce this video series on the work of the Knowledge Keepers in Research at Can-SOLVE CKD.
Anin, Bojo, Oganequedgus Nikaz, Nipsing Donjaba, Deshani and Dayang, Megasado Dem. That is my spirit name, and it's Rosewoman, and I'm from Nipsing First Nation, and I belong to the Eagle Clan, and I live 3 hours north of Toronto in Ojibwe territory. My other name is Dot Bokash Kennedy.
Gila Kasla, Nukwa Am Gilgilishila, Gaitlaha, Jawa de Eno. Hello, I'm Evelyn. I am from the tribe of the Zawadeno people of Kingham Inlet, BC.
Osiem, Tanoyak, Tanoan Siam, and Siaya, Siyoyakwa. The name that I carry is Latash. I'm from the Squamish Nation. My English name is Maurice Nahene.
Niogabwik Indigenous Kas Masquat Nitotem, Ogiji Indigenous Kas, and my English name, birth name, is Myra. I bring you my first two public names, Niogabwik, which is the woman that sits at the center for directions, and Ogiji, that name means a woman with good heart. And my kinship, our clan, as they call them, is the bear, the Muskwa, or the Makwa, and she is a keeper of peace and justice.
That means Thunderbird Woman, and I come from the Coactos First Nations, Treaty 4 in Saskatchewan. My name is Lillian Fable Daniels. I now live in Vancouver for some 37 years. I acknowledge that I am a visitor on this territory of the Coast Salish people, and I appreciate their generosity, allowing me to live in this, on their territory.
My name is George Lalabretti. My language, they call me Essany. I'm from Isle Cross. I work out of Saskatoon right now.
My English name is Mary Wilson, and my ancestral name is Ogamake Bemitet Naihaskanawa, and I am kin to the wolf, and I live born and raised in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
My name is Violet. My home base is Calgary for the past few years. My grassroots is from northern Alberta. I don't want to say Cold Lake because my relatives will say, no, you say Hatwe. Hatwe Chotwe, meaning in English, it's land of the big fish.
Can-SOLVE CKD is a research network devoted to bringing the patient and community voices into research. It's part of Canada's strategy for patient-oriented research. For Indigenous people, that means not only patients and families, but communities, and having their voices come into what's important in research. The Knowledge Keepers are an important part of Can-SOLVE CKD. They reflect the important knowledge in many different ways: traditional knowledge, ceremonial knowledge, historical knowledge of our communities, and how this affects people's health and wellness, and in particular, kidney wellness. One of the priorities of Can-SOLVE CKD is the Wabishki Bizhiko Skaanj learning pathway. It's learning modules that are designed to increase the competence of researchers in working with Indigenous peoples. Listening and learning from Indigenous peoples is a very important part of working and building relationships with Indigenous communities. In this video series, we'll hear from knowledge keepers about their experiences and their abilities to build relationships with researchers to deal with the important issues that communities face.
Beautiful. So within our network, we are guided by a two-eyed seeing approach. The gift of multiple perspectives, a conceptual framework coined by Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall in 2004 for unifying knowledge systems. It is described as learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of Western knowledges and ways of knowing, and to use both these eyes together for the benefit of all. Also within our network, our work supports truth and reconciliation calls to action related to health. Call to action number 18. We acknowledge the impact of historical traumas on the health of Indigenous people. Call to action number 19. We are working to close the gaps in health outcomes between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. And call to action number 24. We have ongoing cultural competency trainings for research team members to cultivate more cultural safety and humility. Article 23 of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples states, Indigenous peoples have the right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for exercising their right to development. In particular, Indigenous peoples have the right to be actively involved in developing and determining health, housing, and other economic and social programs affecting them, and as far as possible, to administer such programs through their own institutions. Over the years, we have created a number of resources to support researchers on how to engage effectively with Indigenous peoples. One of these resources is the 6 R's of Indigenous Engagement Framework. We see this as a major cultural shift in the way that research historically has been carried out with Indigenous peoples. We start building relationship in a non-clinical way, taking opportunity to host meetings in cultural spaces, in community, at healing rooms, and cultural rooms in hospitals. Seek guidance on how to create good relationships as someone who goes into community to provide services. Share a meal whenever possible. Respect. Acknowledge that you are on Indigenous land. Respect that Indigenous peoples know what is needed to be successful. Relevance. Invite participation versus imposing it. How important is your work in relation to what's important in community at any given time? Reciprocity. Active listening. in order that all voices are heard and understood, looking for opportunities to give back, focus on power sharing, reflection, treating others the way we wish to be treated, establish meaningful relationships, acknowledge mistakes and learn from them, and lastly, reconciliation, reconcile and take action, understand privilege, use your position to transfer to those who have less. Understand the history of colonized research conducted on marginalized populations. Take action, practice humility, and exercise ongoing reflection. There we go. So within the network, project leads and team members are putting the 6 R's of Indigenous engagement framework into practice. 2 Can-SOLVE CKD projects in Alberta, the Approach Project and Mind the Gap, are utilizing this framework to build authentic and meaningful partnerships with community. I know that the project teams also use as a guide the knowledge keepers in research resources, as well as other resources within the Wabishki Bizhiko Skaanj learning pathway. The teams were introduced to knowledge keeper Violet March, Dennis Aline from Cold Lake, who is building bridges between the project team members, Indigenous community leaders, patient partners, and community members. Last month, both knowledge keeper Violet March and Marina Loth, a newly recruited Indigenous patient partner, pictured here with the project team, presented at the Northwest Collaborative Forum in Edmonton on the work that is being done in their respective communities. This approach is a prime example of how to foster a two-eyed seeing approach, how to create greater understandings, how to foster authentic relationship building, the sharing of knowledges, and power sharing within research projects with Indigenous peoples. Craig.
Back to me again. So as you can tell, we have seen this slide once already. So we're nearing the end, and we just wanted to reshare our learning objectives today to share about the engagement and development of an Indigenous patient council, to understand practices and protocols of engaging with Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers, and to inform of 6 R's of culturally relevant engagement, and review a case study of the process. And with that, I will say thank you to everybody for listening. For those of you joining us from the virtual space as well, thank you for tuning in. Yeah, with that, we will take some questions if there are any, as you see me holding my extra microphone here. I think we have about 7 minutes left or so for the session, so if there's any questions, please let us know. We also have our contact information on the last slide, as well as some information about Indigenous initiatives at the network. Any questions? Oh, hello? Yeah, there we go. My brother is doing very well, yes. The question was, how is your brother doing, for those of you in the virtual space? And yeah, he's doing well. 11 years, October 18th was our transplant date, and yeah, he's doing good. So 11 years, he now has a boy who's going to be turning 9 around Christmas time, and a little girl who's going to be turning 3 in the new year. So yeah, I think 11 years has brought us a long way, and yeah, he's doing well. 2 questions. Maybe I'll go to the easy access one here first.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was so insightful. My question is to be respectful of the knowing and being and doing phrase that was repeated and the wonderful pathway you brought up for knowledge. Would you suggest, I guess, like, should you do the knowing part first before taking action, or is it appropriate to do both at the same time? And what would be your suggestions there?
For like the 4 L's that we were talking about, or?
There was a wonderful slide which I took a picture of, which I'll be definitely looking at later, of the elder knowledge and also the path to knowledge of all the different courses and materials you could read, and like I'm looking forward to digging into that.
Yeah, in terms of that learning pathway, you could kind of take them in any order you wanted, but I guess the way that the pathway is designed is kind of more about history and then kind of coming into more, I guess, current context as well of how that historical, colonization has affected Indigenous peoples. And so, yeah, I think if you took it in the order that it's shown there, you kind of get more of a backgrounder, and then you kind of move into some more, some more recent things. But I know there's a lot of, kind of resources out there as well. And so I know the learning pathway is one that we've developed, but definitely encourage people to access kind of any cultural competency or safety trainings that you can take. And this is just one kind of guide, I guess, to help guide people on their learning journeys.
Yeah, thank you. Could I ask a follow-up question to that?
For sure.
So just with the knowing and being and doing, is it appropriate to do all 3 at the same time, or would you say that it'd be best to do the knowing first before the doing?
Indigenous ways of knowing, doing, and being. Yeah, I guess to answer that question, the knowing part comes with taking trainings, building relationships with people. In terms of Indigenous ways of doing and being, I feel that those are kind of more like if you're an Indigenous person, then you're doing that. So Indigenous ways of knowing, I think, is a part of, allies learning about historical issues and how those kind of relate to our current context within Indigenous peoples in the country here, and how that affects our health. But yeah, I think it's going to be hard for a non-Indigenous person to do Indigenous being.
Right.
But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Actually, I would like to just add to that as well. So in terms of Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing, and so when we look at a 2-eyed seeing concept, so for Indigenous peoples, it's a lived experience and knowledges that have been acquired generationally, really. And oftentimes, it's hard even to articulate some of that knowledge, compared to like academic knowledge, right? So when we say Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing, that's, a reference to that. Yeah.
One more thing, I think when embodying Indigenous ways of knowing and being, it's constantly evolving, and there's that constant learning that can and should occur as well.
Hi. So in a past life, I was a hemodialysis technician and saw firsthand how disruptive kidney disease can be on the day-to-day. I also had the opportunity to work on a research project involving that, which ended up becoming a article in some obscure journal that no one read. And seeing this and the work that Knowledge Keepers and the type of community that you're building around those living with kidney disease, I can't help but wonder, have you looked at the positive outcomes and impacts that sense of community has on those people? Because in my personal experience, that wasn't there. These people would come in multiple times a week for hours at a time. They'd go home. There was no sense of community in the clinic that I was in. And yet here I see all this work you're doing to build that community and have those meaningful connections and, involving the different cultural aspects and all of this. Are you looking at what kind of impact that has on these people?
So one of the projects that I coordinate, one of the research projects, is called Kidney Check. And so I coordinate that in British Columbia in partnership with the First Nations Health Authority. And we have engaged 16 plus First Nations communities. So it's very much honoring the community and working in partnership. We are not yet at a stage where we're evaluating the impacts and the effect of this approach. But I can say from having been involved in this work over the past 6 years, it's working. Communities are reaching out to have us come in to carry the point of care kidney screening carried out in their communities. In fact, we'll be going to the remote community of Ahousaht early December. So they're on board. We're working together. We honor OCAP principles. We ensure that they are aware of that in the consenting process as well. So assuring them that they own this entire process, they have control over it, they can stop at any point in time. They have access to any information that has been taken from them, which actually the only information that we take away from the community is how many individuals were screened and in what category did they present. So we have a no risk, a low risk, a medium risk, and a high risk. And and then possession. They own, this is their information, this is their process, the community owns it. So yeah, very much focusing on that partnership, working together, and it's strength-based and honoring the self-determination of those communities as well.
Just over time, but I just wanted to mention 2 things for your question. So there are 9 projects a part of Can-SOLVE in phase 2. Catherine mentioned Kidney Check. There's also, with respect to like diabetes, is eye care. And so their main site is based in Winnipeg, and they do work with Indigenous youth who have type 2 diabetes and education around it. And they also have a circle of like patient and parent circle, as well as a knowledge keeper who works with that group as well to help them to develop some coping mechanisms as well, and some education and connection to ceremony. So that's one other I guess project that works within Can-SOLVE, as well as Mind the Gap that Catherine also mentioned. There's also the team in Winnipeg that does that, and that's around mental health and wellness for hemodialysis patients in Winnipeg, and I believe that they've also started engaging with knowledge keepers to kind of help develop some of their work and some of the supports going on in that project. And so that's a little bit more about how knowledge keepers have been engaged in some of the project work. And with that, did you want to say something else?
Time for if there was any questions online. We don't have our phones to see if there was any, so I'm looking to the guys in the back. No, we're good. Okay. Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming to our session. Those legs.